I'm just going to get right to it. Amazon's Rings of Power looks like an absolute mess. As a fan of Tolkien's work for more than 20 years, and as an author and a creative myself, and as someone who wants fantasy to experience a resurgence in film and television, all I can see is a horrifying train wreck slowly unfolding before our eyes. And here's the thing, this predicament with the Rings of Power brings me no pleasure.
Maybe a teensy bit, but...
If anything, I'm actually placed in a very difficult position here. You see, I want an epic show based on Tolkien's Middle-earth to succeed because I love The Lord of the Rings. But on the other hand, this show is a mockery of Tolkien's legendarium. And on the other hand, I will always be an advocate for new writers, new directors, and actors because they deserve a chance to make a splash. But then again, on the other hand, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay are openly botching their shot at doing that. And then they are blaming the fans for the consequences of their bad decisions. And even though I love the Lord of the Rings books and all of the extended works, I'm just going to say this, I am fine with adaptations doing something new with the story. Peter Jackson certainly did that on a number of occasions in his trilogy. But this show, The Rings of Power right here, is not a true adaptation. Instead of anything, it's like a shaky D&D campaign cobbled together by fools frantically trying to prove to everyone at the table that they're actually nerds.
And fireball! Where'd it go? Where is it?
When The Rings of Power premieres, I will review each and every episode. But given everything that I've seen so far of the show's material and its botched production history, I cannot acknowledge this show as a Lord of the Rings adaptation. But instead, I will review it as a fanfiction and as its own standalone story separate from Tolkien. There. 2 reviews per episode. That way I get the chance to be vitriolic towards this butchery of modern myth, but I will also be as fair as I possibly can to Payne and McKay's story as if it were a true original and not a soulless corporate hijacking of a classic tale. So ain't I just a bleeding charitable heart?
You'll get another one.
A better one. That one.
That one? Aye. That one. What say you? Aye!
Now, I've had a lot of discussions with others who feel like I am just being unfair towards the Rings of Power without having seen anything other than the trailers so far. And let's be honest here, the trailers aren't the show. They are just windows into what the show could be. And being such a big Tolkien fan, it's a very good chance that I'm going to be way too harsh and too critical. I'll be honest. Well, please though allow me to lay out my arguments here in this long video for why I don't think the Rings of Power will soar on eagle's wings, but instead plummet to the depths in fiery ruin like Numenor of old. And because this is a channel for novice writers by novice writers, I will address all of my concerns from an author's perspective. I will also engage in the lore or canon of the story and touch on the show's production, since they are crucial to the creative process. This, as I said, will be a long video. So if you're looking for me to tear into how the showrunners have disregarded the lore, or how they are already some clear warning signs that the original storytelling is already pretty bad, let me put up some timestamps for each section here. First, I will be covering the troubled pre-production for the Rings of Power, and then I will address how they have disregarded the lore, and then I'll look at the disastrous post-production, and finally, I will have a look at where the original story is already showing some serious issues. Pre-production is essential to creating both a book and a show. This is where you refine your ideas, solidify the identity of your audience. It's where you do your research. It's where you gather your resources. You make a budget, timetables, and secure proper contracts and contacts. And that's just what books and shows immediately have in common. There's actually a whole lot in common between the two processes. Never mind, though, all of the minute details necessary to make a show function. For me, the pre-production is where the Rings of Power already came off the rails. Now, while this story doesn't immediately tell us the quality of the storytelling within the Rings of Power, what I'm about to share with you does demonstrate a great amount of bitter irony and an outright rejection of Tolkien's values. The Rings of Power began production for Season 1 in New Zealand, basically taking over everything that the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit film productions had left behind. They were even given a kickback in tens of millions of dollars from the government to help foster 5 seasons worth of work and employment in New Zealand. 5 seasons worth of work would be at least 5 years of secured contracts and millions of dollars for the country and its people. Tens of thousands of employed individuals. Rings of Power, however, took New Zealand's money and abandoned them for an even cheaper property and labor in England, resulting in English towns and countryside getting bulldozed to create facilities to shoot seasons 2 through 5. Think about it. For profit, productivity, and industry, Rings of Power betrayed their contract to New Zealand, took the money and ran, and went to England to tear up Tolkien's beloved countryside. I am positive that Tolkien wrote a chapter about that. I believe it's called The Scouring of the Shire, and that tells us exactly what Tolkien himself would think about what the showrunners did to New Zealand and then to England. So when J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay say that they are being true to the spirit of Tolkien, their actions outside of the story prove that they are lying. And this is a constant theme that we will see here in this video, that they are always lying to us. And one more thing. Payne and McKay are students and acolytes of J.J. Abrams, the guy who has made a living out of delivering unsatisfactory shows and movies, and who recently took $500 million from Warner Brothers and betrayed his contract to them to fund all of his own projects. And we're seeing a lot of the same steps here, like for instance, make everything 25% different, which is another hallmark of Abrams and his followers. See how the elves and Middle-earth, including the Balrog, are all just about 25% different from everything else that you've seen in any other Tolkien property? That's no coincidence. By making their production at least 25% different from Tolkien's work, or from Peter Jackson's, or from anyone else's, they can legally claim absolute ownership over the final product. And using their money and connections, they can force out original Tolkien products and replace them with their own stuff, in effect usurping Tolkien and even his estate to lay claim to all of their property. You don't believe me? Just have a look at what they've done to the book covers and online soundtracks. They are changing things. They are making things, all things Tolkien, to resemble the Rings of Power. And it will only be a matter of time, really, before we begin to see some fights for the toys and memorabilia of Lord of the Rings, where we will see Lord of the Rings versus Rings of Power in stores. Now, JD and Patrick told everyone that they wanted to craft a story that was completely Tolkienian, and I'll be honest with you, I hate that word. I hate the word Tolkienian. But in any case, they've said that they wanted to write a story that was completely Tolkienian, and that it would be the story that he never wrote. Oh boy, the hubris from these two, whom I will point out have less credits to their name than I do. I actually have more production under my belt as a novice author, more stories credited to me than they do. That's kind of whack. Anyways, moving on. I just had to throw that out there. And again, remember this. I'm actually totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with letting new people on the scene to create their stories. But don't tell me that these guys who really have nothing to their names are going to come in and write the story that Tolkien never could. That's hubris, and that's stupidity. In any case, they decided to set their story within the meat and bones of the Second Age. And they likened it to going out and drilling for oil, and that with every swing, a geyser of inspiration and rich world building would come forth. And here's the thing, I actually agree with that. Tolkien created enough lore to actually deliver on this exact description that the two give. However, JD and Patrick did not set out to write a story that works with Tolkien's vast world and history. And how do I know this without having seen the show? That's easy to explain. In fact, there are 3 indicators. The first is that they condensed the entire age into a few years. About 3,000 years worth of history into 5. Yeah, that's going to work out well. And that completely disregards all of the rich history and complex buildup that Tolkien created for the Second Age. I already released a video on how I would have written this out, adapting an entire age and actually creating more spin-off shows, which would make you more money, based on all of these characters who would be introduced from season to season as you go throughout the hundreds of years of the Second Age. And it actually works really, really well. So I'll link it here. Second, they threw out all of Tolkien's extensive canon. They did, which immediately means that they wrecked the continuity and the in-world logic, which will always have adverse effects on a story. And third, their marketing makes it clear that their chosen audience was not one that was meant to be universal, but instead they have tapped into the spirit and controversies of our times, abandoning
Reason for madness.
Tolkien built his story on epic poetry, language, music, and history, but the writers and showrunners have not shown us any of this in any of their promotional material. Oh, they've definitely quoted some random stuff in Elvish, but you can see how even Stephen Colbert is confused and at points kind of wants to throttle them, even though he has totally bought into their nonsense. And I just have to say, just looking at all of this, this reminds me of when I actually first learned about the Rings of Power series that was being made. I was so excited to see this show. I spent hours and hours each week doing all kinds of research, combing over every little bit of news, every bit of gossip, every rumor, trying to get my hands on whatever I could to know what was going on with this story. I wanted to know. There are so many fantastic things that could be done with Tolkien's works. This is back when I thought they were doing the First Age, and then when I learned they were doing the Second Age, there was still a whole lot to be excited about. And really, for me, the hype train was going from day one, and it was just building to this mountain's worth of excitement. And then all of that excitement came crumbling down in a devastating avalanche when my father shared with me an article that was an interview with JD and Patrick. This was back in early 2020, so there was definitely a lot of reasons why we would want to have something happy in our lives, and this was, to me, some pretty big happy news. Finally, I'm going to learn some more about this upcoming Amazon series about Tolkien's works. Yes! And then, as I was reading this, it came across as incredibly forced. Now, granted, I understand the pictures and everything like that, the questions are all set up. None of it is truly genuine. But one of the things that immediately caught my eye were those fantastic Hobbit slippers that the two guys were wearing. I actually have the same pair. It's really awesome. It's very comfortable. However, I also know they get dirty really, really fast, and they never get fully clean. Those Hobbit slippers that they said in the interview they were always wearing were pristine. They were so clean, it looked like they had just gotten them out of the box. These guys were posing as Tolkien nerds. And the way that they said that they call each other Frodo and Sam was so cringe and forced. And even when I hear it now, they just recently brought up again in an interview in India. And I was like, oh, it still sounds forced. And one of the ways I know that this is so forced is because, look, as a huge fan of Tolkien's work, I learned how to write in Elvish. I never got around to actually being able to speak Elvish because I'm horrible with learning other languages. But I even gave my nieces and nephews Elvish names. And you know what? It didn't stick. Why didn't it stick? Because it was awkward. A lot of other people are like, yeah, dude, that's taking a little bit too far. And the Lord of the Rings didn't really mean anything to them, and so the names never really took on. And yeah, sure, these guys claim that all of this is really them, that they really truly are these nerds. But the thing is this, I've been there. I've done that. And it's not that cool. It's actually really not even that nerdy. All of their actions, all of their words were those of people trying to convince me that they were the guys who knew Tolkien. And I began to realize, that's not really the case.
Is this guy bothering you? Because it looks like he's leaning.
Thank you.
However, I wanted to give these two guys the benefit of the doubt. I mean, they're new writers and creators just like me, but again, something just felt off. So I distanced myself from the Rings of Power news for a while, thinking that, you know what, maybe it's just a bad first impression now that I get to see these guys. I give them a little bit of space, I come back later on, and then boom, everything's going to be awesome again. But when I returned, the bad news had only begun to pile up. It was evident to me that the time spent in pre-production had been spent not crafting a story worthy of Tolkien, but writing a story that wanted to hijack Middle-earth and use it as a Trojan horse. These guys have not displayed the professionalism to respect Tolkien, nor the creativity to helm an original story, and I'll definitely get to that when I address the many issues with their original concepts. For now, let's talk about some of J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay's worst decisions regarding the lore of Middle-earth. Remember this, lore or canon is there to provide continuity for your story, the plot, the characters, and all the systems that support everything within your story. If you cannot keep the canon straight, your story will be riddled with plot holes and problems that will undermine even the coolest story. If I were to address every deviation from Middle-earth that we have seen thus far in the previews and clips alone, we would be here for hours. When they go this far against the lore, it's hard to even consider this Tolkienian. Sorry boys, but you donked up so bad that not even Ice King can side with you on this one.
You blow it, man.
Let's start with easily the most grievous abomination, what they've done to Galadriel.
My brother gave his life hunting the enemy. His task is now mine. Stand with me.
Commander! Wait!
No! We keep moving!
Look at my mask with my bow.
They have completely degraded Galadriel. By the end of the Second Age, she is a queen. She's married to her childhood sweetheart Celeborn, and she's a loving mother. Furthermore, she is super powerful. Her magic is mighty among the Eldar, and she is by far one of the wisest people in all of Middle-earth. She was discerning enough so that Sauron could not tempt her or deceive her in the slightest. So when anyone says, "Slay Queen Galadriel," you should be thinking about this Galadriel here. But instead, the Rings of Power degrades Galadriel to a brutish, man-spreading grunt full of piss and vinegar with barely enough charisma and skill to be on the first-string football team. And that's an insult to many of the football players I know, who are far more gracious, kind, and intelligent than this sword-wielding meathead that Payne and McKay wrote. Now, they are attempting to defend this position by saying that this is a younger Galadriel who is finding her place in the world. That might have worked for Galadriel at the beginning of the First Age, but you mean to tell me that Galadriel goes from this...
Galadriel, daughter of the Golden House. His task is now mine. Commander of armies of Gil-galad.
Commander! Wait! No! We keep moving!
You have not seen what I have seen.
To this...
For she is more fair than all the jewels beneath the earth.
Gandalf the Grey did not pass the borders of this land. He has fallen into shadow.
Welcome, Frodo of the Shire. One who has seen the eye.
Farewell, Frodo Baggins. I give you the light of Erennian, our most beloved star. May it be a light for you in dark places when all other lights go out.
In the space of 5 years? Yeah, that's not happening. And I know it won't happen because these writers don't have the balls to make a female character suffer and learn hard lessons through defeat and through tribulation. If they prove me wrong, I will happily retract my statement and eat my words. But everything they have said and presented to us thus far tells us that Galadriel will just muscle her way through everything to win the day. As a shameless plug-in, therefore, since they have been so disrespectful, allow me to disrespect these guys a little bit right here, and I'm going to shamelessly plug one of my own books, Bleed, Steam, and Steel. If you want to see a great female character who is honestly awesome from the beginning, go through some trials and tribulation, get knocked down a few pegs in order to learn and become even better, check out my book. It's got some amazing stuff. It's got truly, strongly written female characters who I guarantee you are going to fall in love with. But coming back to Galadriel, they have robbed this beautiful elf of her wisdom, her magic, her beauty, her family, her position of power, and her influence in order to write a generic warrior who needs no man but will have a taste of Sauron on the side, because why not enjoy a little manzel in distress after a hard day's work? And we're not even done yet here. With the newest trailer, they immediately invaded and screwed up one of Tolkien's greatest tales and his best love story, The Lay of Beren and Luthien. And they did this by robbing her brother Finrod of his amazing sacrifice to save Beren from Sauron's werewolves, by he-manning his way out of chains and killing a werewolf with his bare hands. But here, no, Finrod murdered like a wimpy punk by weakling orcs when this guy in the books dueled Sauron with the power of the Eldar in an epic duel of music. And this show doesn't even have a good soundtrack, so no wonder they screwed this part up. So, by giving Galadriel this stupid revenge story, they mess up Finrod and by extent hawk loogies on Tolkien's greatest love story that mirrors him and his wife. And if this weren't a channel that was watched by some children, oh, I would have some very choice words for you, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. But because I'm going to keep this PG-13, I'm not going to say those things. So, as we can see, by ruining this one character alone, by ruining Galadriel, they have already screwed up so much continuity that this story has tumbled off the rails before it's even out of the station. Now, here's another butchering of lore. Numenor. They screwed up this island so bad. Why does this place look like Athens in the Bronze Age? It should be the most advanced civilization outside of Valinor. They get gifts from the High Elves and learn great knowledge that allows them to build stuff like Orthanc, Minas Tirith, and the Argonath on Middle-earth, all of which happens roughly around the same time as the Rings of Power. So does this mean that by losing their island, by losing their culture, and by countless people dying to Sauron's betrayal, that they magically advance in technology and magic? That is utterly, profoundly stupid! Where are Numenor's grand armies? Where is their sweeping, iconic architecture? Where is their grand wealth, their high towers and centers of science and power? The sets for Numenor are empty, generic, dirty, and 2 ages too late. The showrunners also butchered so many of the Númenórean characters who are critical to the unfolding of the detailed fall of Númenor. Tolkien did not spare any details on this. Why is Ar-Pharazôn an old advisor and not the Queen's young scheming cousin? This guy should be like a combination of the best hits from Tywin Lannister and Ramsay Bolton. But you can already tell that the show's version of Ar-Pharazôn is a neutered old man and a barely competent villain with ambitions that far surpass his capability. But Ar-Pharazôn is absolutely capable in the canon. He is evil and he gets things done. Sauron surrenders to him rather than face him in battle because Ar-Pharazôn is just that scary. But Sauron also realizes that he can use the king's own pride to undo him and all of Númenor. And we won't be getting this grand display of military power, politics, and personal faults because they've already screwed up Ar-Pharazôn. And they screwed up Elendil's family too. Where is Anarion? Isildur's brother. This guy's family is central to Gondor's history because Gondor was Anarion's realm. Yes, not Isildur's. But he's been replaced instead with a sister who can't stand her brother and her father and who is obviously better than either of them. And Elendil, the leader of the faithful and one of the few humans who Sauron personally feared and hated above all others because he was so incorruptible and valiant. Where is he? Instead, we are getting saddled with a depressed man and his broken family in a subplot of drama that Tolkien never wrote and that fundamentally undermines the solid characters of Elendil and Isildur and spits in the face of Isildur's tragic fall to the One Ring. Again, by deviating from the lore, they have screwed up so much. And why are the rings not in the first season? I'd love to know.
Ruby Ring, yield your story to us.
It began with the forging of the Great Rings. 3 were given to the elves, 7 to the dwarf lords, and 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, but they were all of them deceived. For another ring was made.
Oh!
The Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a Master Ring.
The ring! The ring!
And into this ring, he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life.
The one who wears its life is to be, again made young though he be old. Yes.
One ring to rule them all.
No longer will those Ketchup Vampires be dealing with just a doddering old fool. I'm at the very height of my powers.
One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring. But there were some who resisted.
Hey, aren't you supposed to propose first?
I know you'd say yes.
It's wrong. The transformation doesn't take time. I've got to have that ring back. My energy. I'm losing it.
Sauron, the enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth, was defeated.
It's over. I'm at my wit's end.
Again, Sauron has been building up a massive empire, and the ring race and their kingdoms are brought under his dominion to overwhelm the elves, dwarves, and few human kingdoms who haven't sold themselves to the Dark Lord. All of that drama, that rich storytelling, the battles, the heroes, the villains, the long history, all of that has been stolen from us. And as a result, it makes no sense then on how we get from these silly little stupid fights in the show
The earth. To the soul.
With me. Ours was no chance meeting.
One thing we can do, better than any creature in all...
There is a tempest in me.
to this epic opening from the Lord of the Rings.
Who resisted? A last alliance of men and elves marched against the armies of Mordor.
Also, why are they writing Erondir and Bronwyn's relationship as forbidden? The elves and humans never outright forbade romance between the two races. True, King Thingol forbade Beron's proposal to Luthien because he wasn't going to marry his precious daughter off to a vagabond short-lived human, and to be fair, he also refused to marry her off to the sons of Feanor because he wanted his beloved daughter to marry the best husband possible. And Beron proved himself to be the best man through his valor, his loyalty, his selflessness, and pure love for Luthien. And Luthien in turn melted her father's heart by showing all those qualities and more, by saving Beron from Sauron and facing Morgoth alone. Holy cow! That's a love story that I want to see. Not the awful crap that they've already screwed up, but instead they're giving us this awkward fan fiction relationship. Now, I will say this, I could get behind it. I honestly could. But they haven't sold me on the love between these two characters one bit. Where's the passionate kiss? Where's the playful banter between them? Every clip of Erondir and Bronwyn is so wooden and lifeless that it's painful. Compare that to just the briefest of moments between Arwen and Aragorn, and the difference is staggering. And by not focusing on the romance between them in any way, the show is signaling to me that their romance is neither important nor well written. Why? Because it fundamentally comes from a misunderstanding of the lore about interspecies relationships such as Tolkien wrote them. And then we have a total botching of Kelebrimbor and Elrond. Why is Elrond not a young lore master and warrior? He is Gil-galad's herald, the High Noldor King's chief advisor. He's a military leader and a public speaker, and he's Galadriel's son-in-law, for crying out loud. But they butchered this boy beyond recognition and stole away a fantastic chance for us to see an elfin family relationship. There is so much good material here that they have wasted! And for what? To give us an elf that looks nothing close to the canonical description of Elrond physically or personality-wise. And why did they do that? To shoehorn in drama between him and Galadriel, so Galadriel can prove herself correct. Which again shows that she won't learn or grow to become the powerful, fearsome queen that we know she is in The Lord of the Rings. See, continuity is important because if you don't follow it, it screws everything up. And then poor Kelebrimbor. This guy is supposed to be younger than Galadriel, being a grandson to Feanor. The elf Galadriel rejected because she perceived in him and Feanor a deep wickedness. And that then makes her relationship with Kelebrimbor all the more beautiful and tragic in the books. Because Galadriel does like Kelebrimbor as opposed to his grandfather, and she sees his good-hearted self, and she respects his talent as one of the greatest elfin smiths in all of history. And Kelebrimbor, for his part, loves her, but it's a one-sided affair because she's married to Celeborn, who is missing in the show, and it really shows. Their relationship is crucial to the creation of the magical jewel, the Elazar, and the creation of the 3 elven rings. And when Sauron murders Celebrimbor and uses his body as a standard to rally his armies, Galadriel keenly feels that loss and directs the counterattack with her husband against Sauron as he besieges Khazad-dûm and Rivendell. Again, there is so much history and drama here, which again, the show will not have.
You blew it, man.
And speaking of Khazad-dûm, they are dumping a load of their own inventions on something very sensitive and important to Tolkien, the matter of worship. The dwarves were very secretive of how they did things in their own private lives. They were created by the Valar Aule, and they were adopted by Ilúvatar as his children, and were woken up after the elves entered Middle-earth. They revere Aule and Ilúvatar in their own private way. So because they could add them whatever they wanted, the showrunners used Tolkien's own ambiguity to create Disa, to use her as a backdoor into dwarven worship rituals, which they've degraded from something sacred to the dwarves into something laughably cultish, displayed by Disa screaming to the roof. This is an insult to Tolkien. This is an insult to the dwarves. And frankly, it is an insult to the actress to stuff her into a gilded potato sack and manipulate her personal identity so they could just justify their desecration of something deeply personal and important to J.R.R. Tolkien. Oh, and let's not forget those stupid comments regarding elven haircuts. Look, we can all argue that the elves would likely have worn their hair long as a symbol of their immortality, and it certainly gives them a greater sense of ethereal beauty. But we can justify different hairstyles for the elves. Really, we canonically can. And that's again why I know JD and Patrick lied to us when they said, go back to the book, go back to the book, go back to the book. If they had gone back to the books in any way, they would have read that Círdan the Shipwright, who should be in this series, wore a long beard. Boom! There! If elves can grow beards, it would be awesome to see some of that, to see some elven beards. And if they can grow beards, how would they have stylized those beards? And with that little window of understanding and that little question, you can justify different haircuts for the elves. You can say, hey, look, elves from this kingdom would actually grow out their beards just like Círdan, and these other elves would probably have worn shorter hair for various reasons. Boom. Right there, Tolkien actually gave you a way out, but you didn't use it? Why? Because you didn't actually read the book, and instead you cherry-picked little sentences here and there in order to justify your original stupid material.
Obama out.
Finally, let's have a look at the Hobbits. Harfoots are hobbits. They are not proto-hobbits or some other race. They are a clan within the hobbits, ousted from their homes by dark forces in the Third Age. As far as Tolkien wrote, they did not exist in the Second Age. Hobbits were a race crafted by Ilúvatar specifically for addressing the evils Sauron brought to Middle-earth, and they play into his grand designs. Saying otherwise and going directly against Tolkien's established lore removes the magic and miracle behind Gandalf discovering the Hobbit's tremendous worth. It also makes Sauron look like a dummy who was bound to lose the war for Middle-earth because he forgot how important the halflings are. Psh, that goes against everything Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings. Oh, and I cannot let it slide that they tried to be funny by remarking that hobbits have large feet.
With our hearts even bigger than our feet.
The hobbits don't mind their big feet. Tolkien never played it up for a joke, but rather stressed their stealthiness. Not only do they disrespect hobbits, they don't even know how to craft an independent culture for them. And I'm going to get into that towards the end of this video, believe you me. Alright, enough about the many ways in which they have dragged the lore and the canon through the mud. Let's talk about the Rings of Powers absolutely abysmal post-production and advertising, because this is where the show has not just run itself off the rails, but caught fire and is currently burning, consuming any goodwill the fans and potential audiences might have had for it. This show is practically a free college course, How to Not Advertise Your Story 101. Remember, it is essential to know your audience, and it's clear that Amazon hasn't got a clue. They're chasing Twitter's approval for Twitter brownie points, which really confuses me because I have never heard of anyone who's managed to turn any of those brownie points in for actual brownies. They've thrown millions of dollars to court influencers, thinking that this will bring in tons of new fans. However, it's only alerted old nerds of all backgrounds to the fact that this is highly manufactured and that none of these people genuinely care for Middle-earth. And let me just say it, if throwing money at people to promote your story actually worked, I would have saved up just a mere $10,000, given it to some influencers to promote my first novel, and I would be on track to best-selling author by now. But it doesn't work that way. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes hard work. They need the old fans of the books and of the Peter Jackson movies. That's tens of millions of people. But they've already alienated the majority of them by constantly lying about the story, disrespecting the canon and disrespecting the fans by first turning to people who don't like Tolkien or his stories. Now, I'm just going to take a moment right here to say this. I am not a fan of gatekeeping. It is detrimental to the survival of any genre, story, or property. But fans will batten down the hatches and fight back if they are disrespected. Instead, fans should be Virgils for people coming into the fan base, guiding them through the rich lore. Rather than gatekeeping, we fans of Tolkien should be patiently helping others to understand these amazing stories that we love and encourage them to find out more and fall in love with Tolkien's Middle-earth for themselves. However, because of the disrespect that's been shown to us by Amazon, I understand why so many fans are turning hostile, even if I don't agree with it. Another thing is this. Patrick and JD have lied over and over again about what they're doing with the story. At this point, I'm actually not even certain what the story's actually going to be about. Okay, so we have Galadriel as a warrior hunting Sauron, who's supposed to be forging the Rings of Power, but that isn't even happening. We have no idea what the dwarves are going to be doing. We have no romance for Erendir and Bronwyn, and the elves are politicking over something, and who knows what it is that they could be possibly politicking about, because everything, according to Galadriel, is supposed to be wonderful. This is like picking up a book and reading on the back cover that you are going to read a mystery thriller. And instead, when you open it up, it's a very slow tale about elderly women trying to get their grandkids to come over and enjoy lunch. We are being told one thing and then getting sold something else entirely. And now we get to something that is highly controversial, but it must be addressed. The Rings of Power showrunners are hiding behind politics and social movements to avoid criticism regarding their story. Now, we here at Camille's Harem care not for real-world politics. We won't comment on any of it. We only care about fictional politics. And that's what JD and Patrick have promised us, but again have shown us nothing of. But I will say this. Relying on current-day politics and current social movements to push your story is short-sighted, divisive, lazy, and totally takes away from the story that you're trying to tell. If you want to cultivate a large and paying audience who will become dedicated fans, these things that I've just described should be immediately avoided, because if you engage in those things, it will tank your story and doom it to obscurity. So that's all I'm going to say on the topic. Getting tangled up in any of the stuff that they've brought up is just engaging in their trap.
Triggered my trap card!
And all of the critics and YouTubers who are out there who are just hung up on this stuff are honestly playing into Amazon's hands, because they can then use their politics to create a narrative where they are the soulful saints. Remember, these are the people who betrayed New Zealand to destroy the English countryside to make a quick buck. Don't engage in their obvious traps. Don't give these traitors any material to build a narrative where they are the misunderstood saviors of Middle-earth. So, with all that being said, allow me to now turn my attention towards the many, many problems with their original material. The fact of the matter is that much of the Rings of Power has nothing to do with Tolkien's lore. They have stolen names, locations, and a few events in Middle-earth's history. The rest is spun out of whole cloth and has no canonical connection to Tolkien's legendarium. Now, I am all for new stories and new fantasy material. I love it, but it is clear that they've even messed up here so bad that the burning wreck that is the Rings of Power has not only fallen off the rails and burst into a horrifying inferno, but they are now throwing gasoline onto this dumpster fire and accidentally consuming the entire train station in the flames. Let's have a look at some of their poorly conceived world building thus far. First of all, the Hobbits. They are described as nomadic farmers. Now, that's actually a real thing. The Comanche and other Plains Indians in America planted small crops across the Midwest in cultivated groves so that way they would be able to harvest fruits and vegetables as they pursued herds of bison across the plains. This was a great way of balancing their diets as they went. But the hobbits here are clearly not hunters, which again is actually something counter to what Tolkien wrote. So, nomadic farmers without herds to hunt makes no sense. But not only that, them having books on astronomy and meteorology makes no sense. Not because those sciences didn't exist or because nomadic people would know about those things, but because they are nomads who lack the means to preserve books of paper, parchment, or even plate. Especially those avoiding other civilizations, they wouldn't have this kind of industry at hand. Therefore, all the knowledge should not be written, but should be oral tradition. And then, why are these hobbits all dirty? That is just stupid. Again, Native American tribes understood that even while on the dusty road, they needed to keep themselves clean. Cleanliness is healthiness. Being clean is not mean. And you aren't going to get any love if you reek of bad body odor. Look into history and you'll see that everyone, even in the Dark Ages, understood the merits of being clean. By the show's own depictions, these dirty hobbits should be disease-ridden, malnourished, and illiterate. All of the world building regarding the hobbits in this show is nonsensical. Despite my best efforts to suspend my disbelief regarding the hobbits, this show continues to assault and violate me with dumb world building. But it's not just the hobbits. Again, looking at Numenor, everything feels off. For a people enjoying an age of unprecedented prosperity and power, why is their city so empty? Why do the people again look so dirty? Why is their architecture inferior to that of their colonies on the mainland? Why do they have a massive cavalry when seafaring people all know how dangerous and expensive it is to transport horses over the sea? Why is their armor inconsistent with their fashion? Everything just looks wrong. Guys, it's simple to commit to one ideal. Look, you've already broken the lore, so let's just accept that. And since you've decided to design these people looking like they're Athenian, why not just stick with the Athenian aesthetic? If you're going to, though, try to rip off George R.R. Martin, at least be smart about it. Martin understands how culture, architecture, and fashion all blend together. They're all connected. Heck, even a better example would actually be the Wheel of Time. Now, you might think, Lars, aren't you being just a little bit harsh on these guys right here? No, I am not. If you spend $1 billion on production and had years to write this stuff out, just doing things because they're cool doesn't cut it. If you're going to walk in the world of epic fantasy, you have to consider all of these things because you are crafting a world that people should be able to logically envision and imaginatively fall into and live there. And this show is clearly failing. I have no desire to go to this version of Middle-earth. It looks disgusting and disease-ridden. It looks backwards and bad. I could go almost anywhere else in the Peter Jackson variations. Heck, I would go to Mordor, for crying out loud, and breathe in all of those poisonous fumes, because that place works. It looks like a real place. This, no, none of it does. It looks awful. Next, we come to the romance. Where is it? You pitched us a love story between an elf man and a human woman, and I am all here for that. But where is it? You have told us nothing about why these two people are drawn together. We don't see them being loving towards each other, flirting, kissing, serving each other, nada. We are getting more romance from meat-headed Galadriel, as she's acting all tsundere towards Sauron, who is giving her that Netflix and chill look.
Anne and an elf. Circumstances arose.
We are companions by chance.
Sorry, Birdly, but this tsundere Galadriel is just not worth your time. Because again, this is not a loving Galadriel, but a vicious jock who is hellbent on revenge. And that's another thing. These guys have no idea how to write a good revenge story. The 90s X-Men series, for example, really explored the futility and self-destructive nature of revenge with Wolverine's character. Then we've got Gravity Falls, which played around with how gratifying revenge is, but how it just engenders future problems. Even The Princess Bride has a great way of telling us a revenge narrative and wrapping it up with showing how, you know what, you really need something else in your life. However, JD and Patrick have already royally screwed up here. Galadriel is going for a revenge, gunning for Sauron who killed her brother. You're 4,000 years late, girl. And no one, for some dumb reason, believes her that the Dark Lord is on the loose. So she will get thousands of people killed just to prove herself right, and then not see her quest for vengeance through because she doesn't end up defeating Sauron. In the end, she sits around for another 3,000 years and lets the Hobbits do the job for her. Even if they write it where Galadriel learns that revenge is wrong, it makes her look weak and pathetic to give up on a quest after getting so many people murdered, and then hide behind Frodo later down the road. Congrats, JD and Patrick! You not only robbed Galadriel of her power and character, you're also robbing her of her courage and vengeance. Remind me again how much you guys respect women. Now, they've also written so many new characters. Fine, you know, it's the Second Age, and you would have to actually fill in some of the gaps that Tolkien left because Tolkien didn't write extensive lore for the Second Age. He did that for the First and the Third. However, who are these new characters? What are their motivations? What can we expect to discover about them? We honestly don't know. We can't tell from the trailers, nor can we tell from any of the interviews had with the crew. Instead, we know that we're getting a stoic elf who apparently loves a woman, but we have no evidence to that. We have a woman who is a healer, but we don't see her healing anyone. We have a princess screaming at the ceiling. We have a cultist doing her best Eminem impersonation. We have a boy who's just been kidnapped whose personality appears to be sweaty?
Ah, you're at that creepy age where you spy on girls, huh?
My hormones are like a sweaty cage!
Then there's a daughter who is angry at her family because she's more mature than them. And we have a bunch of hobbits who should be disease-ridden, malnourished, and illiterate getting badgered by a young hobbit who apparently wants to talk to the big folk. And that's probably the most characterization that we've gotten for any character so far. And then we get a guy who falls to Earth from an asteroid. Honestly, I'm not interested in any of these characters because the showrunners have given us nothing to work with. I want to get to know who these characters are, but what I've just told you right there is more or less what they've already told us. And I've actually added a little bit. Now, who knows? It could turn out that all of my complaints here will be resolved in the first few episodes of the show. I might just be pontificating putridness without purpose, and if that turns out to be the case, I'll own it. I'll eat my words. But all of the problems in the show's production, their abysmal advertising, and the ways in which they have wrecked the lore have given me no hope, but only despair.
The bit of despair. Don't even think. Don't even think about trying to escape.
In fact, I feel like watching this show will be just like...
I'm sucking life. I've just sucked 1 year of your life away. Interesting.
Again, I will be reviewing each and every episode to see what J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay have done with Middle-earth and their $1 billion from Amazon. I will review each episode as a fan fiction and then as its own original story, seeing how it fares on 2 different scales. I think that is generous enough from this Tolkien fan and fellow writer who has serious doubts about what's going on here. But I cannot help but shake that this is all likely a massive money laundering scheme. I mean, $1 billion has been spent on the story, and they've been nothing but disrespectful to the fans, to Tolkien. They, instead of just kind of created this Trojan horse when to steal a classic, just like they stole millions of dollars from one country, went and trashed another country, continued to disrespect millions of fans, and then sell us blatant lies and lazy storytelling before we have even seen episode 1, you'd think that $1 billion could have furnished something gorgeous and well delivered. And yes, there are some beautiful shots, but the show doesn't look beautiful. The Rings of Power thus far have not delivered. So it makes me wonder, when will the reports leak out from Amazon about embezzlements? Well, those are my thoughts so far on the Rings of Power. Trust me, I have way more to say. But you and I both have lives to live, and we need some positivity in our lives. So please, check out my other videos defending Tolkien and his contributions to the fantasy genre. The man was a genius, and there are many reasons why his Tales of Arda are the only legendarium in all of fiction. And if you are a writer looking for writing advice, well, we've got plenty more of that for you to check out, especially over at our podcast, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have links for really everything that you need and more down in the description below. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share out this video. And I also want to take a moment to thank you for checking this out and for joining us on this adventure that we call writing. And until the next video, y'all.
How do you go on when in your heart you begin to understand?
How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened?
No, the journey doesn't end here.
But in the end, it's only a passing thing. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer.
The grey red curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it.
Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
That isn't so bad.
No, it isn't.
Goes ever on and on, down from the doorway.
Until our next meeting.